Hey guys, so my talk's called the Hackathon Zoo. A lot of this is around my personal opinions and experience, and I'm really interested if any of you want to ask questions or flat out disagree with what I say, that we can have a conversation afterwards. So I really see this as the start of a conversation rather than fact. So quickly a bit about me. My name's Kevin, I'm a JavaScript developer, but also since 2011 I've been taking part in and running hacks. I took part in my first one in 2011 and then started helping to organize them in 2012. For the last 18 months, it's been my job to run hackathons. So a whole range, hacks for young people, hacks for government and charities, but also quite a lot for kind of big commercial companies, which we run slightly differently. So what I'm really hoping to do is talk through the different kinds of hacks as I see them kind of delineated, talk through some of the ways to make them successful and how we can take away learnings from each of those kinds to make our student hackathons more successful. But firstly, I think it's really important to talk about who we actually do this for. And as the two speakers before me said, we really do this for the developer community. Massively diverse, massive range of people who are inside of it. And I really see kind of four areas where people fall into the community that I've highlighted here. There are a whole bunch more though. So there are students that find their way into this really rich, wide developer community. There are civic hackers, people who want to make their communities better or make government better. Or fix real-world problems. Again, something that's been touched on a couple of times already. There are people who are just developers for their day job. I say just in like the nicest way. Just shouldn't have slipped into that sentence. People who are developers for their day job, and then also people who have like a lower level of skill and just want to kind of come along and experience it. And this community, and it's not just these four kinds of people, but this community is driven by a whole bunch of different things. Some are driven by money, and that's completely okay. Some just want to build something different to what they normally build. Others are really intrigued by the idea of being part of a wider community. This is something, again, definitely in the last few years since the launch of MLH and like where the Hackathon Hackers Facebook group has grown massively, is also quite interesting. Being a developer was at one point potentially quite an isolating experience. So having a wider community around to fall back on is also brilliant. And then also some people are driven just for the desire to do social good and actually create real world change. So I'm going to go through the different kinds of hacks as I see them kind of split up. Again, it's really just the start of a conversation and based on my personal experience. But regardless of the kind, I think there are three things that are really important. The first is around ownership. That's IP and the ability to take projects forward and who that belongs to. I don't necessarily think that it's that in some situations that developers need to keep their IP, as long as that's made really clear and there's some kind of transfer. Sometimes if you pay developers to come, I'll get onto that a bit later, and how we've made that work. Safety, make sure everyone's safe. That's not just for the participants, that's also for the staff. You may have vulnerable people, young people, disabled people coming along, and making sure that you run an event that's safe for all is really key. And then finally, inclusivity. Regardless of the kind of event, and there are some that are kind of structured more for people with lower skill who want to learn and more for people who enjoy a competitive atmosphere. It's important that everyone still enjoys it and feels included. So the first kind of hack that I see is around young people, and for the sake of this, I'm going to call people who are under the age of 18 young people, even though in most cases 16 to 25 is what is a young person, but under 18. I see these events being much more focused around learning as kind of the primary aim. At a lot of events I've run with younger people, the participants have a lower level of skill, and that's not the same for everyone who comes, but that's just kind of a generalization of everyone, that they come in with slightly lower level of skill or indeed experience, and that we should try and create an environment that allows those people to learn loads in a short amount of time. In terms of the Hackathon Zoo, if I had to give a hack for young people and animal, although I've never seen a zoo where there are bees, I'd give it a B. Buzzing with excitement, lots of energy, and lots of energy. 2 points, not 3. In my opinion, success at these kinds of events is having loads of people leave the event having learnt loads and really wanting more. And then when there are more opportunities to take part in a wider range of events, wanting to come to some of those kinds of hackathons as well. So what can we take away from this? I think it's really important that we provide ample support at our hackathons. That's not just for people who have lower level of skill, but if we're encouraging people to use new kinds of technology to make sure that there are loads of people around who actually understand how that technology works and are happy to jump in and provide the support. I don't think I've ever been to a hack where this hasn't happened, but I think it's worth noting. Secondly, to create a low-pressure environment. Again, this is something that I think has happened fairly successfully at most hacks I've been to, but to make people feel like they want to come along and they don't need to have a crazy level of skill to come and have a good time. To match them up potentially with people who don't mind acting in more of a mentor role and integrate them into their teams. And then finally, learn from the participants as well. It's really interesting. I've learned I've learned quite a lot from running hacks for young people because the participants just seem to be unbounded by the structures of works and other frameworks that we're all used to and have different skills and come and often give opinions and feedback that I had absolutely never considered. And I think it's really important that we learn from the participants at events for young people. So the second kind, and I'm going to go over this one quite quickly, is student hackathons. I think the most important thing around student hackathons, and this has been said by loads of people who I've spoken to already, is about building a community. Building a community of really passionate people. Again, they don't need to have the highest level of skill, but just to really, really want to interact with other people who share a similar mindset. The interesting thing around student hackathons is they're quite often run for communities in like a geographical area, so to continue building that community outside of the event as well is also quite important. If I was to give this one an animal, it would be a chimpanzee. Uses the tools around it with great efficacy. Not the perfect metaphor, but a chimpanzee, and I found like a pre-made vector of a chimpanzee and everything. Success in my eyes is around building an awesome community of really, really passionate people. There is obviously still a massive drive to have people go away having learnt loads and wanting more. But at these events in particular, especially for people who have more freedom to build that community and continue interacting with them. The key points here to take away are to try and create a caring and collaborative environment that people thrive in and really want to continue being in. And also, try and build into your schedule some social time. I've been to some hacks before where it's been all about building, all about presenting, and then getting out the door immediately after. In order to make this work and build this brilliant community, allow loads of time for different teams to interact with each other outside of the event. The next kind of hack I see are kind of for good hackathons. So I've given some examples here because for good is like a really broad, fairly fluffy term that doesn't necessarily mean much. Charities, governments are often the kind of hacks that I would deem as for good. There have been loads of terrible natural disasters in the last couple of years, and I know a lot of the immediate support that has been able to be provided have been out of things built at hackathons. If I was to give this an animal, it would be an elephant. Big, strong, long-term memory and long-term impact. I think success at these events are really around raising awareness around social action. They're often the start of a conversation rather than something that's built and put out into the world in just the 2 days, and to continue building that community, very similar to my points around the student hackathon. I think, again, keep the conversation going. A lot of these points mirror the previous kind of hackathon that I saw, being the student hack, and try and keep the conversation going even after the event's over, especially when we're talking about social action and actually making real-world change. Often that doesn't just happen in a couple of days, and that is just the start of a much longer journey. In order to make this happen, encourage cross-team collaboration. I've met some really awesome people working in teams at hackathons. At some, though, I haven't even had the opportunity to go and talk to everyone else. So to try and encourage that collaboration. One of the examples is a hack for a government department I ran. I can't quite remember which one it was, where one person collated a bunch of data and made it into a nice developer-friendly format and then just shared it with everyone, because at the end of the day, everyone is trying to achieve the same goal. The next kind are kind of commercial hackathons, and I see these really split into two areas. The first are public commercial hackathons, where you just kind of sign up and come along, and I'll give some examples of those. And then the second are invite commercial hackathons, where you specifically invite particular people, or people apply, and then you choose certain people to come along if they fit a criteria. So I'm going to talk about the differences between those. Now, this is the part where a lot of this is based on my own personal opinion, and I definitely don't expect everyone to agree with everything I'm going to say, but I would really love to have some conversations afterwards about the reasons you think I'm talking crap, or the reasons you agree with something I say. So the first kind I'm going to go over are kind of the invite commercial hackathons, some of the examples of the ones that I've run reasonably recently. Firstly, let's talk about the animal. It's a puma. It's the top of the food chain. Strong organizations that are theoretically able to pull in resource and work quicker. I did throw the word theoretically in there. They get the point, and they generally get to the point of killing quicker. Killing being killing the bad ideas. That was really forced. No one even wanted to laugh there, but that was pity. That was pity. I was expecting that. That's fine. So these are really interesting events. Thank you for then really laughing at the pity. So the really interesting thing about these events, in both sides of the commercial, the public, and the invite, are, in my opinion, one of the core aims is to further the business goals of the business or businesses who sponsor the event. And that may not be a terribly popular thing to say, but in some cases it works really well. Understanding what the sponsors are trying to get out of it, and then sharing that quite openly with all the participants. If they've bought into the event enough to apply, or they've bought into the event enough to grab a ticket, then they probably want to actually help that business in some way. And so by actually understanding what the sponsor is trying to get out of that and sharing that with all the participants, quite often you'll get some better results out of it. I think success in this kind of event is achieving the business goals of the sponsors, and that is, again, some people will completely disagree with me for that, but I think as long as the events are still fun and engaging for developers and everything is completely transparent the whole time, then I don't necessarily see an issue with that. So what can we take away with this? Be much more descriptive and prescriptive around what you're actually trying to get out of it. That's not just for sponsors. That's also for you as organizers. What are you actually trying to get out of it? We're all in this community together, and quite often if you're open with people, they will reward that by working towards that. The second is again, explaining what sponsors want. It's kind of linked to the first point. Sometimes sponsors are just after some profile raising, and there isn't necessarily anything too much more than that they want. Sometimes they're really struggling with something, and they would really love the opinion of other developers who aren't in there every day to see what they can build instead. And the third is something which, this is probably one of the less popular points that I imagine will come out of it, but reward participation. So some of the events I've run, we've played around with the idea of paying developers to come along. This really only works for the invite ones where you're fixed on numbers and you choose people to come along. But the idea is then that you level out the playing field, and people aren't necessarily going to the event to win. So it essentially turns into a piece of contracting work, if you will, which is why some people dislike using this model as a way to describe a hackathon, but it works really well. So reward people for coming along. That could be giving them some cool tech. That could be paying them to come along, and then it just levels out the playing field. It's in situations like this where also talking about ownership is quite interesting. Again, complete transparency the whole time is absolutely key. But at some events that we've run, from the moment before developers apply to take part, we said, so the business aims is that the company we're running the event for wants to grab some ideas and can potentially continue building them. So we're going to pay you to come along, but at the end, the IP doesn't belong to you. And as long as that's completely transparent, that's worked quite well. Now, that's not for everyone, and that's completely fine, but it is just another way to run an event, which sometimes works really well. So just another idea around rewarding participation and then lowering the value of the prize to try and level the playing field. The next are kind of the public commercial hackathons, which I mentioned earlier. I think the best example of this is Battle Hack, which is run really, really well. Okay, run slightly less well. No, I'm kidding. No, run really, really well. I did initially try and find a vector of a peacock, but I couldn't find one, and then I ran out of time. So you have a singing bird there. You know, I think a lot of these events, again, are about solving the business aims of the company in some cases. But also in these kind of events where you get a much bigger audience and a much bigger amount of exposure, it's around profile raising as well, profile raising of the sponsors taking part. So that's just another interesting way to look at it. I think success of these events are increasing the profile of the event by making sure everyone has a fantastic time and talks about it. So at events like this, I think, again, it's really clear. It's really important to be clear around ownership. Some of the hackathon horror stories that I've heard have been around this point, where you sign up for an event, you go along, you give up your time for free, you have an amazing weekend, and actually you didn't read the small print in the terms and conditions, and you no longer own the ideas. That's happening less and less as more and more people are reading the terms and conditions and better understanding. But at events where people are giving up their time, be really, really clear around ownership. 2, keep an eye on mood. These events often have slightly higher value prizes, and people with much lower levels of skill sometimes are not included as much. So make sure that it's still an inclusive environment. And if that means introducing people who are alone into teams that you think they'd work well in, then so be it. I think that works really well. The third one is actually a really poorly phrased point now that I'm reading it. But set expectations of sponsors. So a lot of the companies we work for have really, or I've run hacks for, have really, really good DevRel who understand when developers have headphones on, that means you don't necessarily bother them. Others I've worked with have bombarded developers every 20 minutes for the whole 2-day event, and nothing's got built, and then they've been really disappointed. So to try and set the expectations of the sponsors, one, around when they can interact with participants and how to do that in a way that makes them feel good, that they're getting loads out of it, but also is less disruptive for the participants. And also expectations around what's actually going to come out the other end. In some larger organizations that I've run hacks for, they are used to seeing at the end of a software development process, a finished, polished project. And in a couple of occasions have been slightly confused at the fact that, we've got loads, that's brilliant, but none of these are up to scratch. And that's just down to expectation setting around what's actually going to come out of it. The final type that I'm going to talk about are internal hackathons. So again, run another couple of these. We're going to go for the dolphin. It's a gentler, intelligent animal, but still reasonably fast-moving. I'm also led to believe that if you annoy them, they will just rip your arm off. But that's beyond the point for this. These are a lot more around introducing large organizations to different ways of working. Again, a lot of the large ones have really long development processes, or really long processes across the board, to try and introduce them to the idea that actually we can be a lot quicker and spend only a couple of days, playing around with loads of ideas, and not all of those will be good, but that's brilliant. If we can axe an idea after a couple of days, we can save loads of resource that we would have spent building that whole thing out before realizing it's a mistake. I think success at this kind is starting to change the way traditional companies work and getting them to think in a quicker way. Also to enthuse internal developers. A load of developers in large companies actually are maintaining large projects or building large projects, and I imagine that can get quite boring. So to also enthuse internal developers with kind of new ideas that can come their way. These are really kind of really top-level points that touch in that and how we can improve our hacks, which is help explain the process to all of the sponsors. It's not necessarily the case that all of them will fully understand what a hackathon is until the end of the event. So explain the process, how it's going to work, and what they should expect. Again, set expectations. What's actually going to come out of it? What can we achieve in 2 days? In most cases, completely blown away by the number of things, but in some other cases, slightly underwhelmed by the finish of them. But what do you expect in a couple of days? And then finally, to infect with excitement, a load of sponsors that have sponsored events that I've taken part in have gone away completely buzzing at the fact that something like this can happen because they've just never seen anything like it before. So make sure that you talk about how awesome it is, and you explain how they could potentially start to think about ways to take this into their own organizations. But again, this is slightly less around student hacks, the internal one. What can we learn from this? The world is your oyster, and at the end of the day, we do this for the community. As long as the events are fun, there are loads of different ways in which we can run them. As long as they have fun. There are kind of 10 key points here that I've pulled out of all of the slides. I think it's really important to provide ample support, and that changes. If you're running events where you are expecting a slightly higher level of skill, then maybe don't put so much resource on the support. But if you're running an event where you're unsure of the skill level that's going to be there, or you're expecting a slightly lower level of skill, or regardless, make sure that there are plenty of people around who know their stuff, who are happy to help out, and that you can make introductions to. Provide time for social, encourage cross-team collaboration as opposed to just working with 3 or 4 other people for a couple of days. Set expectations and be clear around ownership. Always be clear around ownership and avoid some of the horror stories. And there are some others there. That's been the Hackathon Zoo. Yeah, I'd be really interested to have a chat after this. If anyone likes what I've said or disagrees, I'd be really interested. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kevin. I really like when speakers say that this point's controversial and then go and do it anyway. That's what we're here for. Cool. Does anyone have any questions for Kevin? Oh, come on, there must be a question. Oh, Jess has a question. This is ridiculous.
So I've seen you talk a lot about things that people are doing wrong and things that are doing positively. What's sort of the one takeaway? So if you had to summarize to be like, do this or don't do this, what do you think would be the biggest impact that it could have on an event?
Go for it.
Oh, I thought I was off the hook. I was going to walk back to the chair. I was going to sit down and be like, that's over. I think it's around the support. I genuinely think it's around the support. If you're at a hack and you're encouraging people to use specific technologies, make sure there's people around who know how to use it. That's happened before. Gone to a hack, gone, hey, why don't you use X? And then no one knows how to use it. Regardless, make sure there's loads of people around who don't mind acting in more of a mentor role for people with lower levels of skill, or not necessarily even skill, just confidence. Working with really shit-hot developers who know their stuff, who are happy to kind of take someone on into their team and show them some different techniques is really, really good for experience.
Wonderful. Cool. Are there any other questions for Kevin? Go ahead. Oh.
So you were saying a lot about sort of commercial hackathons, and one of the key things I saw, like the themes, was about transparency.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess, so a lot of the commercial hackathons, sometimes the organizers kind of sit outside of kind of this community. They don't know much about hackathons. How do you think, as a community, we can kind of inform them and keep them not in check, but kind of make sure that they stay transparent and that they are honest?
I think it goes back to one of the earlier points, which is involve them really, really early. Involve them really early. Explain what the process is going to be. Help come to some of those conclusions around what you're actually trying to achieve about it. Are you interested in potentially taking forward some of these ideas before you even start putting it out to developers? And then from the moment you do that, let them know everything that they need to know.
Yeah.
Cool.
Wonderful. Any other questions? Cool. Killing
Sweet.
it.
Awesome.
Thank you very much,
Thanks,
Kevin. Give a
guys.
huge round of applause.